In the midst of an unforgiving snowstorm, a compassionate waitress offered her shelter to a homeless man in desperate need. The following day, an unexpected visitor arrived, none other than a feared Mafia boss, and his arrival set into motion a chain of events that would forever alter the course of her life. You might never see a story like this again. Stay with us, follow, comment, and share this tale, or risk missing out on something unforgettable. Let's dive into this incredible journey. As the howling winds raged outside, the warm glow of Maple Street Diner stood in stark contrast to the fierce storm that had gripped Burlington, Vermont. Inside, Jessica Porter wiped down the counter for the fifth time, her eyes darting nervously to the window. The snow had transformed the town into a frozen wasteland, and it seemed like the entire world was being swallowed by the storm. Her last few customers had left hours ago, yet Jessica couldn't bring herself to close up shop. For her, the diner was everything, the last remnant of a life full of dreams she once held. "Another cup, Mr. Winters," she asked kindly, addressing the elderly man in the corner booth who was sipping slowly on his coffee. He was a regular, always braving the elements to come for her homemade pie and share a conversation. "Better not," he chuckled. "Margaret will have my head if my blood pressure goes up again." With a sigh, he slid a $20 bill across the table. "You should think about closing, Jess. This storm's not letting up anytime soon." Jessica smiled warmly but shook her head. "I'll keep the doors open a bit longer. Some people might need a place to wait it out." Just as her words left her mouth, the door swung open with a gust of snow and frigid air. She turned, expecting to see the usual plow driver seeking refuge, but instead, an elderly woman stumbled into the diner. She was wrapped in a coat far too thin for such brutal weather, her silver hair covered with snow, and her face flushed from the cold. "Oh my goodness!" Jessica exclaimed, rushing to catch the woman as she swayed on her feet. "Are you all right?" I got lost," the woman whispered, her voice quivering from the cold. "My taxi dropped me on the wrong street. I can't find my son's address." Jessica gently helped her to a booth, her heart already aching for the woman. "Mr. Winters, can you turn up the heat?" she asked, before turning her attention back to the frail woman. "Let me get you some hot tea. You'll warm up soon." Moments later, Jessica returned with a steaming mug of chamomile tea and an emergency blanket, wrapping it around the woman's shoulders. "Thank you, dear," the woman said softly as her color began to return. "I'm Eleanor. Eleanor Mitchell." "Jessica Porter," she replied, settling into the booth across from her. "Looks like you picked the worst day to get lost in Burlington. Where were you headed? Maybe I can help." Eleanor took a shaky sip from her cup, her hands trembling slightly. "My son lives here. I haven't seen him in, well, it's been 5 years. I thought it was time to make amends." Her voice cracked slightly with emotion. "I thought maybe I could surprise him." Jessica nodded, understanding more than the woman could have known. "I get that. Trying to fix old wounds," she said gently. "Do you have his address? Maybe I can help you get there when the storm clears a bit." Eleanor fumbled in her purse and handed Jessica a crumpled piece of paper. "Lakeside Manor, apartment 1201. It's supposed to be on the north side of town." Jessica's eyebrows shot up as she read the address. Lakeside Manor wasn't just any address, it was the most exclusive residence in Burlington, a glass tower of luxury overlooking the serene Lake Champlain. "That's quite a distance from here, especially in this weather," Jessica said softly. "The roads to that part of town might be blocked until tomorrow." Eleanor's shoulders slumped in disappointment. "I should have called him first, but I wanted to surprise him," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "He's always been so busy with his work. I thought if I just showed up, maybe it would make a difference." Jessica took a seat beside her, offering a comforting smile. "You can stay here as long as you need. The diner's not much, but it's warm. You'll be safe." After a while, Eleanor's exhaustion caught up with her, and Jessica made up a makeshift bed in the back office for the woman to rest. Before helping her settle in, Jessica called her boss to explain that she would be staying open to provide shelter for anyone who needed it. "I should call my son," Eleanor murmured as Jessica adjusted her blanket. "He'll be worried if he checks his security cameras and sees that I'm here, but hasn't heard from me." "Security cameras?" Jessica asked, her curiosity piqued. Eleanor nodded. "Ethan's always been cautious about his privacy. He has cameras installed to monitor who visits." Jessica handed her the diner's phone. "Call him, let him know you're safe." After several rings, Eleanor sighed and left a brief voicemail, explaining where she was and that she was fine. "He's probably in a meeting. He practically lives at his office," Eleanor added, handing the phone back to Jessica. "Really? What does he do?" Jessica asked, intrigued. Eleanor smiled faintly. "He runs Mitchell Innovations. He created some software that changed everything, apparently. He's always been brilliant, even as a boy. Too brilliant for his own good sometimes." Jessica felt a sudden rush of realization. Mitchell Innovations was one of the biggest tech companies in the region, and its CEO, Ethan Mitchell, was notorious for his cutthroat approach to business. His face was a fixture in business publications, always stern, never offering a smile. "Your son is Ethan Mitchell?" Jessica asked, incredulous. Eleanor nodded, wrapping the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Yes, that's him." Jessica's mind raced. "I've heard of him. Everyone in Vermont has. But, most of what I've heard isn't exactly flattering." Eleanor gave a soft chuckle, her eyes distant. "He wasn't always like what you've heard. After his father passed, something inside him changed. He built walls around himself, kept everyone away, even me." Jessica's heart softened at the sadness in Eleanor's voice. "I'm sorry. But don't worry, he'll come around. Maybe not today, but soon." As the evening wore on, Jessica stayed by Eleanor's side, offering her comfort in the warmth of the diner. The storm continued its relentless assault on the town, but Jessica felt a rare sense of peace. For once, there were no demands on her time, just the quiet of the diner and the hope that tomorrow would bring new possibilities. Then, the sound of tires crunching through the snow outside caught her attention. A black SUV pulled up, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The door swung open, and Jessica found herself face to face with the last person she had ever expected to see. Ethan Mitchell stood in the doorway, his expensive coat dusted with snow, his sharp eyes scanning the room until they locked on her. "I'm looking for Eleanor Mitchell," he said in a low, commanding voice. "She left a message saying she was here." Jessica remained calm, the years of managing a diner giving her a sense of poise. "Your mother is resting in my office." She was half frozen when she arrived, she said, standing tall in front of him. Without hesitation, Ethan's icy expression shifted, a flicker of concern crossing his features. "Take me to her," he demanded. Jessica crossed her arms, standing firm. "She's sleeping. The cold and stress took their toll on her. She needs rest." Ethan's voice remained cold but edged with frustration. "I didn't drive through a blizzard just to be told I can't see my own mother." Jessica met his gaze, unflinching. "I didn't stay open in this storm to let someone disturb an elderly woman who needs to rest." The tension between them thickened, but for a moment, the storm outside seemed to calm. Jessica could practically sense the calculations going on behind Ethan Mitchell's piercing blue eyes, likely working out how to gain control of the situation. She'd encountered men like him before, those who saw the world as a series of transactions, where people were either tools to be used or obstacles to be overcome. But to her surprise, he exhaled slowly and gave a reluctant nod. "Fine. May I at least check on her?" "Of course," Jessica replied. She led him through the diner, guiding him toward the small office in the back. "Quietly, please," Ethan requested, his voice softer than before. Despite his imposing stature, his footsteps were nearly silent. Jessica opened the door just wide enough for him to peer inside, revealing Eleanor sleeping soundly on the couch, wrapped tightly in blankets. "She was trying to surprise you," Jessica whispered gently. "Got lost in the storm." Ethan studied his mother's face, his expression unreadable. "She didn't tell me she was coming." "Families are complicated," Jessica said, closing the door softly behind her. Back in the diner, she gestured toward a booth. "Coffee? You look like you could use some warmth, too," she added with a small smile. Ethan seemed poised to decline but hesitated as he glanced out the window, watching the storm grow worse. "Thank you," he said, his voice quieter than before. Jessica poured 2 cups of coffee, sliding one across the table to him as she sat down opposite. She observed him as he removed his expensive wool coat, revealing a sharp charcoal suit beneath that probably cost more than she made in 3 months. "How did you find her?" Ethan asked after taking a sip of coffee, his eyebrows raising slightly in surprise at the quality of the brew. "She stumbled and half-frozen," Jessica replied, her hands wrapped around her own mug for warmth. "She said her taxi dropped her at the wrong address. She mentioned trying to make amends." Ethan's jaw tightened, his expression hardening for a moment. "My mother excels at dramatic gestures." "Braving a blizzard at her age?" Jessica observed. "Seems more like determination." Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, his tone turning sharp. "You don't know anything about our situation." "True," Jessica shrugged, her voice calm and unbothered. "But I know she could have died out there trying to find you." "That says something." Ethan studied her carefully, the usual layers of indifference slowly peeling away. Most people tiptoed around him, either intimidated by his reputation or awed by his wealth. But Jessica Porter spoke to him like he was just another person, his wealth and status were meaningless in her eyes. "Do you know who I am?" he asked suddenly, his voice cold but laced with an undercurrent of something else. Jessica couldn't hide the amused smile that tugged at her lips. "Is that the question you ask everyone you meet?" For a brief moment, Ethan looked taken aback, as if he hadn't expected her to respond that way. Then, his lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smirk. "Only the ones who aren't impressed by me." "I'm impressed by people who earn respect, not those who demand it," Jessica replied, taking a slow sip of her coffee. "Well, yes," she added, "your mother did mention you run Mitchell Innovations. And I'm Jessica Porter. I manage this place." She motioned around the humble diner, its warm atmosphere in stark contrast to the frigid storm outside. Ethan's eyes narrowed as he took in her attire, simple black dress beneath her apron, unadorned with jewelry, and practical shoes. Yet there was something about her posture, her calm demeanor, that suggested she didn't quite fit the mold of the diner manager. "Just the manager," he pressed, his tone sharper than before. "For now, yes." Her words were final, the subject closed. Ethan studied her a moment longer, sensing there was more to Jessica Porter than met the eye. Her hands were slightly reddened from work, but her fingers showed signs of care, of someone who wasn't unfamiliar with delicate tasks. Her language and bearing suggested an education, a sophistication that was out of place here. "How long have you worked here?" he asked, trying to piece together the mystery of who she really was. "Long enough to know when someone's trying to interrogate me," she replied with a raised eyebrow. "Why the interest in my employment history, Mr. Mitchell?" "Ethan," he corrected automatically. "And I'm curious about the woman who saved my mother from freezing to death." The storm outside roared louder, its winds rattling the diner's windows, a reminder of the severity of the night. Jessica glanced at her watch. "The roads are getting worse," she said, her voice practical. "You might be stuck here for the night, too." Ethan frowned, pulling out his phone. "I have a driver waiting." "Even four-wheel drive has limits in this weather," Jessica countered. "The plows have stopped running until morning." Ethan stared at his phone, his frown deepening as he tapped the screen. "You're right. Routes to Lakeside are closed." "Welcome to my impromptu storm shelter," Jessica said with a small, wry smile as she stood, collecting their empty mugs. There's a staff room upstairs with a cart, she added. Not up to your usual standards, I'm sure, but it's clean and warm. Ethan watched her as she moved with surprising efficiency behind the counter, rinsing mugs and wiping down surfaces. There was an economy to her movements, a precision that struck him as out of place. Most people would have fidgeted or become nervous under his sustained attention. But Jessica Porter moved as though she had forgotten he was there. How did you end up here? Ethan finally asked, breaking the silence. Managing a diner in Burlington doesn't seem like your. My what? She challenged when he trailed off. Original career path, he finished carefully. Jessica paused for a beat, her hand stilling momentarily on the counter. Life has a way of changing our paths when we least expect it. Before Ethan could respond, a loud crack of thunder shook the diner, followed by the ominous flickering of the lights. Moments later, they were plunged into darkness. Perfect, Jessica muttered, unperturbed. She moved with surprising confidence through the dark, locating a flashlight beneath the counter. The beam of light illuminated her face from below as she explained. The backup generator should kick in for essential systems, but the main lights are out until power's restored. Do you need help? Ethan asked, already unbuttoning his suit jacket. Jessica's flashlight beam caught his movement. Well. The CEO knows how to roll up his sleeves. I wasn't born in a boardroom, Miss Porter, he replied dryly. Could have fooled me, she murmured. Check the breaker panel by the back door while I find candles. 15 minutes later, they had set up a warm pocket of light in the center of the diner. The gas stove was still working, providing both heat and cooking capability. Jessica had lit hurricane lamps and candles, creating pools of golden light that transformed the small, humble space into something almost magical. Ethan returned from checking on Eleanor, who was still sleeping soundly. Good, Jessica said as she handed him a steaming mug of fresh coffee. The generators running the essential systems, and the space heaters in the office and staff room will keep the cold at bay. Their fingers brushed as she passed him the mug, and Jessica felt an unexpected jolt of awareness. In the soft candlelight, Ethan Mitchell no longer seemed like the ruthless business mogul he was often painted as in the media. He was just a man, someone with striking features, a sharp jawline, and eyes that reflected the flickering flames with a hypnotic intensity. Thank you, he said quietly, his voice almost hushed. For taking care of my mother, he added, the sincerity in his voice catching Jessica off guard. Anyone would have done the same, she replied, her voice soft but dismissive. No, they wouldn't, he said firmly, his gaze never leaving hers. Most people would have called emergency services and washed their hands of responsibility. Jessica shifted uncomfortably under his stare. I like your mother, she said finally. She reminds me of my grandmother. Ethan studied her for a long moment, before asking, who were you before this, Jessica Porter? Before diners and soup and small-town hospitality? The question lingered in the air between them, heavy with unspoken weight. Jessica's expression closed, her body language shifting slightly as she gathered her thoughts. Someone who learned the hard way that not all successful men come with integrity, she replied at last, her voice soft but edged with steel. With a small, deliberate sigh, she added, now, if you'll excuse me, I should check the supplies. This might be a long night. She turned to walk away, but before she could move too far, Ethan reached out and gently caught her wrist. The touch sent a ripple through the air, charged with something deeper than mere physical awareness. I've offended you, he said, letting go the moment she stiffened. That wasn't my intention. Jessica glanced down at her wrist, then met his gaze. In the flickering light of the emergency lamps, his expression appeared genuinely contrite. No offense taken, she replied evenly. But some things aren't meant to be shared with strangers during power outages, she added, her tone a little softer. We're hardly strangers now, Ethan countered. You've seen my mother at her most vulnerable. You've witnessed me braving a blizzard for her. And I've seen, he hesitated, his words weighing heavy. What? Jessica challenged, raising an eyebrow. What exactly do you think you've seen, Mr. Mitchell? Someone hiding, he said simply, his voice a quiet but intense declaration. Someone much too intelligent and capable to be just managing a roadside diner. Someone running from something, or someone. The precision of his words struck Jessica like a cold gust, sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the storm outside. Before she could respond, the quiet stirrings of Eleanor waking from her sleep interrupted the tension. Eleanor blinked slowly, disoriented, her surroundings unfamiliar. The events of the day crept back to her mind, the taxi, the blinding snow, and the kind young woman at the diner. She carefully sat up, her joints protesting. "You're awake," Jessica's voice was soft as she appeared beside her, smiling gently. Eleanor turned, her heart lifting at the sight of her son sitting in a chair beside her. "Ethan," she whispered, her eyes welling up. "You came." "Of course I came," he replied, his voice warm but measured. "You left me a voicemail saying you were stranded in a blizzard." Though his words were calm, the concern was palpable. "I wanted to surprise you for your birthday," Eleanor explained, reaching for his hand, half expecting him to pull away, as he always had. But to her surprise, he allowed her touch. "My birthday isn't for 3 days," Ethan pointed out, but there was a softness to his tone that hadn't been there before. "I know," Eleanor responded, "but I thought maybe we'd have time to talk before celebrating." A brief flicker of something vulnerable crossed Ethan's face, a ghost of the boy he used to be, but it was quickly concealed beneath a veil of control. "The roads are closed," he said after a moment, as if shifting the conversation. "We'll have to stay here tonight." Eleanor looked around, her eyes crinkling with a soft smile. "The manager has been very accommodating, Jessica. She's a remarkable young woman, isn't she? So capable." Ethan's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing slightly. "There's something unusual about her," he remarked. "She doesn't fit here." "Not everyone belongs where life has placed them," Eleanor replied, her voice soft but knowing. "You taught me that." Before Ethan could respond, the office door creaked open and Jessica appeared with a tray of food. "I thought I heard voices," she said, her tone warm. "How are you feeling, Eleanor?" "Much better, dear. And so happy to see my son," Eleanor replied, her face lighting up at the sight of him. Ethan stood as Jessica placed a steaming bowl of soup and fresh tea in front of Eleanor. "You've been very kind to my mother," Ethan said, his voice steady. Jessica's smile cooled slightly. "Nothing, contrary to what you might believe, Mr. Mitchell. Not everything has a price tag." Eleanor glanced between them, sensing the subtle tension in the air. "Jessica, please call him Ethan." "And Ethan," she continued, her gaze sharp, "stop trying to throw money at every situation. The poor girl offered shelter, not services." Jessica stifled a smile at Eleanor's blunt assessment. "It's fine. Mr. Mitchell and I have already established our differing perspectives." "Have we?" Ethan raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "I thought we were just getting acquainted." "Semantics," Jessica replied dismissively, waving a hand. "Elena, the bathroom is down the hall if you need it. The power's out, but we have emergency lighting, and the heat is working." Eleanor's sharp eyes hadn't missed the undercurrent between her son and Jessica. "Perhaps you could show Ethan where he'll be sleeping while I freshen up." Jessica nodded, though the expression on her face suggested she'd rather show Ethan the door. "This way, Mr. Mitchell," she said, leading him upstairs. The small room was sparse, a desk, a mini fridge, and a narrow cot tucked in the corner. Ethan glanced around, taking it all in with a mixture of curiosity and mild surprise. "Staff break room?" he asked, his tone neutral. "Not exactly the penthouse," Jessica replied with a wry smile, "but it's the best I can offer." Ethan surveyed the humble space silently, then asked, "And where will you sleep?" "I'll take one of the booths downstairs," Jessica said. "I want to stay near the main entrance in case anyone else needs shelter." Ethan frowned. Take the cot. I'll sleep in a booth, Jessica retorted. I'm not giving the CEO of Mitchell Innovations a backache on my watch. The last thing I need is a lawsuit because you couldn't properly code after sleeping on vinyl upholstery. Ethan couldn't help the small twitch of his lips. Is that your professional assessment? Just practical risk management, she replied as she turned to leave. He stepped into her path, blocking her way. Why do I get the distinct impression you're trying to avoid being alone with me? Ethan asked, his voice low, laced with something more than curiosity. Jessica met his gaze, unflinching. Because you're used to women seeking your company, not avoiding it. Touché, he murmured, his smile genuine for the first time, transforming his features from merely handsome to devastatingly attractive. But that doesn't answer my question. I have a diner to manage during a power outage and a blizzard, Jessica said firmly. Entertaining you isn't on my priority list. Entertaining me? Ethan echoed, stepping closer. Is that what you think I want? Entertainment? Jessica refused to back down, despite his proximity. The small room suddenly felt even smaller, the air between them thick with tension. I think you're a man used to getting what he wants, she said quietly. And right now, you want to solve the puzzle I apparently represent. I'm not interested in being analyzed or acquired, Mr. Mitchell, she said, her voice steady. Ethan, he corrected again, softer this time. Ethan, she conceded. Before she could turn to leave, a gust of wind rattled the building, and Jessica instinctively reached out to steady herself. Her hand landed on Ethan's chest, and for one breathless moment, they stood frozen, connected by that single point of contact. Jessica became acutely aware of his height, the faint scent of his cologne, the warmth radiating from him in the chilly room. She pulled away first, clearing her throat. I should check the generator. Downstairs, Jessica found Eleanor already arranging blankets in one of the booths. You don't have to do that, she protested. Nonsense. I'm not an invalid, Eleanor replied with a knowing smile. Eleanor smoothed the blankets with practiced hands. Besides, it gives me something to do while you and my son circle each other like wary cats. Jessica's face flushed with heat. I don't know what you mean. Of course you don't, Eleanor said, her smile knowing. He's difficult, my Ethan. Life made him that way. But there's a good heart underneath all that armor. Mrs. Mitchell, Jessica began, but Eleanor cut her off with a smile. Eleanor, please. Eleanor. Whatever you think you observed between your son and me, I assure you, it's nothing. We're strangers trapped by a storm, Jessica said firmly. Fate has interesting ways of making things happen, Eleanor replied cryptically. Jessica hesitated before continuing, now, tell me more about yourself, Jessica. What brought you to this charming little diner? Jessica busied herself with adjusting candles. It's not an exciting story. I disagree, came Ethan's voice from behind her as he descended the stairs. I think it's probably very exciting. Jessica shot him a warning glance. Your mother needs rest. Not my life history, Ethan teased. Actually, Eleanor interjected, what I need is food. I'm starving. Grateful for the diversion, Jessica headed to the kitchen. I can make sandwiches. The gas stove still works if you'd prefer something hot. Allow me to help, Ethan offered, following her before she could protest. In the kitchen, Jessica pulled ingredients from the refrigerator. Make yourself useful and slice the bread. To her surprise, Ethan rolled up his sleeves and began slicing with unexpected skill, cutting even slices from the artisan loaf. You've done that before, Jessica remarked, eyeing his smooth movements. Ethan's words hung in the air, thick with the unspoken tension between them. Jessica's expression closed off, her posture subtly shifting as if bracing for something. Someone who learned the hard way that not all successful men are built on integrity, she responded at last, her voice soft but carrying an edge of steel. With a subtle exhale, she added, now, if you'll excuse me, I need to check the supplies. Looks like it's going to be a long night. As she turned to walk away, Ethan reached out and caught her wrist, his touch sending an unexpected current between them, something charged and deeper than mere physical awareness. "I've offended you," he said, releasing her immediately when she stiffened. "That wasn't my intention." Jessica glanced down at her wrist, then back to his face. In the shifting shadows, his expression seemed genuinely contrite. "No offense taken," she replied evenly. "But some things aren't meant to be shared with strangers during a power outage," she added, her tone softening but still guarded. "We're hardly strangers now," Ethan countered. "You've seen my mother in her vulnerable state. You've seen me drive through a blizzard to reach her. And I've seen," Jessica paused, challenging him with her gaze. "What, exactly? What do you think you've seen, Mr. Mitchell?" "Someone hiding," he said simply. "Someone much too intelligent and capable to be just running a roadside diner. Someone running from something, or someone." The accuracy of his assessment sent a shiver through Jessica that had nothing to do with the blizzard outside. Eleanor stirred on the couch, groggily waking from her sleep. Eleanor blinked at her unfamiliar surroundings, confusion clouding her mind as the day's events slowly returned to her. The taxi, the blinding snow, and the warm young woman at the diner. As she carefully sat up, Jessica appeared by her side, a reassuring smile on her face. "You're awake," Jessica said softly, her voice warm and steady. Eleanor turned her head, her heart lifting at the sight of Ethan seated next to her. "Ethan," she whispered, a tear slipping from the corner of her eye. "You came." "Of course I came," Ethan replied, his tone calm but warm. "You left me a voicemail saying you were stranded in a blizzard. I wanted to surprise you for your birthday," Eleanor explained, reaching for his hand, half expecting him to pull away. But to her surprise, he allowed the contact. "My birthday isn't for 3 days," Ethan remarked with a slight smile, but his tone was softer than usual. "I know," Eleanor responded gently. "But I thought we might need time to talk before celebrating." A brief flicker of vulnerability crossed Ethan's face, the boy she remembered emerging before quickly being hidden behind practiced control. "The roads are closed," he said, shifting the topic. "We'll have to stay here tonight." Eleanor looked around, her expression softening with a smile. "The manager has been very kind, Jessica. She's a remarkable young woman, isn't she?" Ethan's eyes narrowed as he considered her words. "There's something unusual about her," he observed. "She doesn't fit here," he continued, a touch of concern creeping into his voice. "Not everyone belongs where life has placed them," Eleanor said softly, her gaze gentle. "You taught me that." Before Ethan could respond, the office door creaked open, and Jessica appeared carrying a tray. "I thought I heard voices," she said, her tone warm. "How are you feeling, Eleanor?" "I'm feeling much better, dear. And so happy to see my son," Eleanor replied with a heartfelt smile. Ethan stood as Jessica placed a steaming bowl of soup and fresh tea in front of Eleanor. "You've been very kind to my mother," Ethan said, his voice steady. Jessica's smile turned cool. "Nothing, contrary to what you might believe, Mr. Mitchell. Not everything has a price tag." Eleanor glanced between the two, sensing a subtle tension. "Jessica, please, call him Ethan." "And Ethan," she added, her voice firm, "stop trying to throw money at every situation. The poor girl offered shelter, not services." Jessica held back a smile at Eleanor's candid remark. "It's fine. Mr. Mitchell and I have already established our differing perspectives." "Have we?" Ethan raised an eyebrow, a playful curiosity sparking in his eyes. "I thought we were just getting acquainted." "Semantics," Jessica responded with a dismissive wave. "Elena, the bathroom is down the hall if you need it. The power's out, but we have emergency lighting, and the heat is working." Eleanor's sharp gaze noticed the unspoken tension between Jessica and Ethan. "Perhaps you could show Ethan where he'll be sleeping while I freshen up." Jessica nodded, but her expression suggested she would rather show Ethan the door. "This way, Mr. Mitchell," she said with an air of professionalism, leading him upstairs. The room she showed him was sparse, just a desk, a mini fridge, and a narrow cot in the corner. Ethan took in the simple space without comment. "Staff break room?" he asked, his voice casual but curious. "Not exactly the penthouse," Jessica replied, giving him a wry smile. "But it's the best I can offer." Ethan surveyed the room before asking, "And where will you sleep?" "I'll take one of the booths downstairs," Jessica replied. "I want to stay near the main entrance in case anyone else needs shelter." Ethan frowned, clearly not satisfied with her answer. "Take the cot." "I'll sleep in a booth," Jessica retorted firmly. "I'm not giving the CEO of Mitchell Innovations a backache on my watch. The last thing I need is a lawsuit because you couldn't code properly after sleeping on vinyl upholstery." Ethan's lips twitched in amusement. "Is that your professional assessment?" "Just practical risk management," she said as she turned to leave. He stepped into her path, blocking her way. "Why do I get the distinct impression you're trying to avoid being alone with me?" Ethan asked, his voice lower than before, the tension between them thickening. Jessica met his gaze with a calm, unflinching look. "Because you're used to women seeking your company, not avoiding it." "Touché," Ethan said with a smile, the genuine warmth in it making him look even more attractive than before. "But that doesn't answer my question." "I have a diner to manage during a power outage and a blizzard," Jessica replied firmly. "Entertaining you isn't on my priority list." "Entertaining me?" Ethan echoed, stepping closer, his presence even more commanding in the small space. "Is that what you think I want? Entertainment?" Jessica refused to back away, even as he closed the distance. "I think you're a man used to getting what he wants," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the heat building between them. "And right now, you want to solve the puzzle I apparently represent." "I'm not interested in being analyzed or acquired, Mr. Mitchell," she said, her tone firm. "Ethan," he corrected again, his voice softer this time. "Ethan," she conceded with a resigned nod. Before she could turn away, a gust of wind rattled the building, causing Jessica to instinctively reach out to steady herself. Her hand landed on Ethan's chest, and in that moment, they stood frozen, connected by the unexpected touch. Jessica felt a strange awareness of his height, the scent of his cologne, and the warmth of his body against hers. She pulled away first, clearing her throat. "I should check the generator." Downstairs, Jessica found Eleanor already arranging blankets in one of the booths. "You don't have to do that," she protested gently. "Nonsense. I'm not an invalid," Eleanor said with a knowing smile. Eleanor continued smoothing the blankets. "Besides, it gives me something to do while you and my son circle each other like wary cats." Jessica's face flushed, but she tried to brush it off. "I don't know what you mean." "Of course you don't," Eleanor replied, her smile knowing. "He's difficult, my Ethan. Life made him that way. But there's a good heart underneath all that armor." "Mrs. Mitchell," Jessica began, but Eleanor cut her off. "Eleanor, please." "Eleanor," she corrected. "Whatever you think you observed between your son and me, I assure you it's nothing. We're strangers who happen to be trapped by a storm," Jessica said firmly, trying to dismiss the tension. "Fate has interesting ways of making things happen," Eleanor replied cryptically. Jessica hesitated but changed the subject. "Now, tell me more about yourself, Jessica. What brought you to this charming little diner?" Jessica busied herself with adjusting candles. "It's not an exciting story." "I disagree," came Ethan's voice as he descended the stairs. "I think it's probably very exciting." Jessica shot him a warning glance. "Your mother needs rest." "Not my life history," Ethan teased. "Actually," Eleanor interjected, "what I need is food. I'm starving." Grateful for the distraction, Jessica headed to the kitchen. "I can make sandwiches. The gas stove still works if you'd prefer something hot." "Allow me to help," Ethan offered, following her before she could protest. In the kitchen, Jessica pulled ingredients from the refrigerator. "Make yourself useful and slice the bread." To her surprise, Ethan rolled up his sleeves and began slicing the bread with unexpected skill. "You've done that before," she observed. Ethan considered his response carefully, sensing the weight his words now carried in this strange and delicate situation. "I believe in ethical business practices," he said at last, his voice steady. "Profit without principle is ultimately unsustainable." Jessica's expression remained neutral, but a flicker of surprise flashed in her eyes, one that Ethan caught before it disappeared. James, however, wasn't as subtle. "Noble sentiments," he remarked with a thin smile, though sometimes difficult to apply in practice. As Jessica discovered. He turned to her. "How long have you been in Burlington?" "It must be, 3 years now?" "4," Jessica corrected, her jaw tightening. "For years?" James echoed thoughtfully. "Amazing how time flies." "You know, Ethan, Jessica was involved in an interesting situation before she left Harrington Capital. Perhaps she's told you about it." The subtle threat in his tone didn't go unnoticed. Jessica set her spoon down, her knuckles turning white with tension. "James," she said quietly, her voice edged with warning. Before the situation could escalate further, Eleanor intervened, sensing the rising tension between the three of them. "I'm feeling rather tired," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Perhaps we could continue this conversation tomorrow." "Of course," Jessica agreed quickly, standing up. "Let me refresh your blankets." As Jessica helped Eleanor back to the office, James leaned toward Ethan, his voice low but insistent. "She hasn't told you, has she?" "Told me what?" Ethan asked, raising an eyebrow. "Why she really left New York." James shook his head with a smirk. "I'm not surprised. It's not something she'd be proud of." "Stop dancing around it," Ethan demanded, his voice firm. "What happened?" James studied him for a moment before answering. "She accused Harrington Capital of fraud. Claimed we were manipulating market data, misleading clients. Tried to take her evidence to the SEC." Ethan frowned, his expression darkening. "And were you?" James looked genuinely offended by the insinuation. "Of course not. We were cleared of all allegations." "But by then, the damage to Jessica's reputation was done," James continued. "No firm on Wall Street would touch her after that kind of scandal. So she ran to Vermont. Can you blame her?" James asked, a hint of disdain in his voice. "She tried to destroy the company that gave her every opportunity." Ethan's expression remained hard as he absorbed the words. "Look, I'm not telling you this to speak ill of her," James continued, his tone shifting slightly. "I'm telling you because we're on the verge of the biggest acquisition of our careers. The Nortec deal will triple Mitchell Innovations' market value if nothing derails it." "What does Jessica have to do with Nortec?" Ethan asked, his voice sharpening slightly. "Probably nothing," James conceded, shrugging. "But timing is everything. We can't afford any complications." Before Ethan could respond, Jessica reappeared, her posture straight and her movements measured. The sight of her, holding herself together despite the strain in her eyes, twisted something in his chest. "Eleanor's settled," she announced, her voice cool but professional. "I've made up a couple more beds in case the storm brings other strays." James stood, straightening his suit. "I should check in with the office. Is there anywhere I might make a private call?" "The storage room has the strongest signal," Jessica replied tonelessly, her voice almost flat. Once James left, a heavy silence settled between Jessica and Ethan. Ethan watched her move about the room, clearing the dishes with an almost mechanical precision. The usual warmth she exuded seemed absent, replaced by a sharpness he hadn't seen before. "Were you planning to tell me?" Ethan asked finally, his voice soft but insistent. Jessica didn't pretend not to understand. It didn't seem relevant until he walked through that door. About your allegations against his company, he said, his voice quieter now. Jessica's hands stilled as she turned to face him. Her expression was carefully composed, but there was an underlying tension she couldn't hide. So he shared his version of events. He says you accused Harrington Capital of fraud. That the allegations were investigated and dismissed, she said, her tone bitter. Is that all? Ethan studied her for a long moment. Should there be more? Jessica's smile was sad, almost resigned. Would it matter if there were? James Harrington is your friend and business partner. I'm just the woman who happened to shelter your mother during a storm. The distance in her voice bothered him more than it should have. I prefer to form my own judgments, he said, taking a step closer to her. Based on what? She challenged, not backing down. You barely know me. I'm a good judge of character. So was I, once, she replied softly, her gaze dropping to the counter. Look how that worked out for me. Ethan stepped closer, invading her space until she was forced to meet his eyes again. Tell me your side. Why? She asked, a sharp edge creeping into her voice. So you can decide which of us is lying. She shook her head. I don't need to justify myself to you. Damn it, Jessica, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. I'm trying to understand. No, you're trying to protect your business interests, she said, her voice cold. Her eyes flashed with sudden anger. James made sure to mention your big acquisition, didn't he? Warned you that I might be a complication. Ethan's silence confirmed her suspicion. That's what I thought. She moved to step around him, but he caught her arm, stopping her in her tracks. What did you find at Harrington Capital? He asked quietly. For a moment, it seemed she might tell him. But then, as if on cue, the back door burst open again, cutting her off as James returned, his timing impeccable. Sorry to interrupt, he said, though his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Ethan, I need to speak with you about the Nortec situation. Something's come up. Jessica pulled her arm from Ethan's grasp, turning away. I should check the generator anyway. As she disappeared into the back, James handed Ethan his phone. You should see this email that just came through. Ethan glanced at the message, his expression hardening. This data can't be right. That's what I thought, James said, taking the phone back. But I've triple-checked the figures. Nortec's valuation was inflated. If we'd gone through with the acquisition at the agreed price, we would have overpaid by millions. Ethan finished grimly, at best. At worst, we could have been accused of knowingly engaging in securities fraud. James ran a hand through his hair. We dodged a bullet, Ethan. How did you find this? Ethan asked, his mind racing. One of our analysts caught it, James explained. Pure luck. But it makes me wonder how many other deals might have similar issues lurking in their financial reports. Ethan frowned, his thoughts spinning. We need to overhaul our due diligence process if we missed this. Exactly my concern, James agreed, his tone a little more serious. There's something else. The analyst who caught it found Jessica Porter's name on some of the original Nortec prospectus documents from her time at Harrington Capital. Ethan's brow furrowed. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything, James replied, his face neutral. Just noting a curious coincidence. She had access to the early Nortec financials. Then she makes fraud allegations against Harrington. Now she's mysteriously back in your orbit just as we're about to acquire Nortec. That's quite a conspiracy theory, Ethan muttered, shaking his head. Is it? James countered. The woman who tried to destroy my company just happens to be here with your mother the night before our biggest deal. Ethan paused, considering James's words. He wanted to dismiss the suspicions, but his instincts, years of business experience, told him not to. Jessica Porter was hiding something, that much was clear. And the timing was too suspicious to ignore. I'll talk to her, Ethan decided, his voice calm but resolute. Get to the bottom of it, James warned. Just be careful. She's convincing. Trust me, I learned that the hard way. When Jessica returned, she found the two men huddled in conversation. They broke apart as she approached, and the sudden silence was palpable. The way Ethan looked at her, more guarded than before, analytical rather than curious, told her everything she needed to know. The generator should last through the night, she reported, her voice professional and distant. If you gentlemen will excuse me, I have some inventory to complete before morning. Jessica, Ethan called after her. We need to talk. She paused, not turning around. I think your business partner has said everything that needs saying, Mr. Mitchell. The formality in her words stung. You haven't told your side. Would it make a difference? She glanced back, her smile sad. Some battles aren't worth fighting twice. Before my access was revoked, I made copies, Jessica said calmly, her voice unwavering. I may have been naive about how far you'd go to silence me, but I wasn't stupid. James' face paled slightly, though he tried to maintain his composure. Am I bluffing? Jessica's eyes flicked briefly to Ethan, her gaze steady. The Nortec acquisition you're pursuing, she continued, her voice low but piercing, what made you suddenly question their valuation tonight? Ethan's expression remained unreadable, his mind working behind his cool facade. Data inconsistencies, specifically revenue projection anomalies. Discrepancies between reported earnings and actual cash flow. Jessica nodded, her eyes never leaving his. The same issues I flagged 3 years ago, I'm guessing. Only the numbers are probably worse now because they've had years to compound the fraud. Eleanor had appeared at the base of the stairs, watching the confrontation with growing concern. Ethan. He didn't turn. It's all right, Mother. Go back to bed. No, Eleanor said firmly, stepping closer. I don't think it is all right. Not if what I'm hearing is true. James, recovering his composure, put on his most reassuring smile. Mrs. Mitchell, I assure you, this is just a misunderstanding. Understanding Ms. Porter has a personal vendetta, young man, Eleanor interrupted, her voice sharp with authority. I was married to a high school science teacher for 40 years. I know what integrity looks like. And right now, I don't see it in you. James' smile froze. With all due respect, he began, but Ethan's voice cut through the rising tension. Enough. James turned to face him, his expression shifting as the situation took an unexpected turn. Did you know about the Nortec fraud? Ethan's voice was steady but hard, his words deliberate. There was no fraud, James insisted, his voice growing defensive. Just aggressive accounting practices, common in. Did you know? Ethan's voice grew firmer, each word falling like a hammer. For the first time, James looked uncertain, his confidence faltering. You're not seriously taking her side, are you? After everything we've built together? She's nobody, Ethan. A failed analyst who couldn't handle the pressure of real business. Ethan's gaze hardened, the quiet fury beneath his calm exterior evident. Answer the question. James stiffened, his expression darkening. Fine, he said, his voice clipped. Yes. I knew Nortec was cooking their books. Everyone knew. It's how the game is played, he added with a shrug, as though it were a minor detail. We would have fixed it after acquisition, restructured their reporting, and no one would have been the wiser. He turned to Jessica, a dismissive wave in his tone. Except the shareholders, who would have paid an inflated price. Jessica didn't flinch. The employees who would have lost jobs in the restructuring. The pension funds invested in both companies. Collateral damage, James dismissed with a shrug, his words cold. The kind of casualties Ethan has never hesitated to accept in pursuit of growth. Isn't that right, partner? Ethan's expression remained impassive, but Jessica saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Regret, perhaps. Recognition. You said you have evidence. Ethan asked Jessica, ignoring James' attempt to implicate him. "I do," Jessica replied. "Not here, obviously. It's in a safe place." "Alleged evidence," James corrected, his voice dripping with skepticism. "Which conveniently can't be produced right now." "I don't need to produce it right now," Jessica replied evenly. "Just explain what it contains." The original Nortec reports. Emails directing analysts to alter data. The access logs showing my credentials being used while I was demonstrably elsewhere. She turned to Ethan, her voice steady but loaded with gravity. "Do you want to know how deep it goes? How many other acquisitions were based on fraudulent data?" "She's lying," James insisted, his voice now tinged with desperation. Ethan, ever analytical, watched the exchange carefully. His gaze remained fixed on Jessica, his silence speaking volumes. "We've been friends for 15 years. Partners," James added, his tone turning pleading. "I've stood by you through everything. Are you really going to throw that away based on the word of this waitress?" "Manager," Jessica corrected him automatically, her voice sharp. Ethan didn't respond immediately. He simply watched, weighing the situation with cold precision. Loyalty versus truth. Friendship versus integrity. The empire he'd built versus the foundation it stood on. "Think about what you're doing," James warned, his tone shifting to one of quiet threat. "If she takes this public, it won't just be me who falls. Mitchell Innovations has been involved in every major deal Harrington Capital has structured for the past decade." Ethan's gaze never wavered. "Your reputation, your company," James pressed, his voice low but urgent. "Stop," Ethan said quietly but firmly. "You're making my decision easier," he added, each word like a weight dropping into place. James' face twisted in disbelief. "You can't be serious, Ethan. Everything we've built was built on fraud." Apparently, Ethan's face had hardened to granite. "Get out." James stood tall, a bitter sneer on his lips. "You'll regret this. When your stock plummets and the lawsuits start." "I said get out," Ethan repeated, his voice growing more forceful, his presence towering over James now. "Now. Before I call the authorities and have this conversation in front of witnesses with badges." For a tense moment, it seemed James might refuse. But then, with deliberate calm, he straightened his coat and turned toward the door. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "Not by a long shot," Ethan responded, his voice unwavering. Once James had stormed out, the diner fell into heavy silence. Jessica, still trembling from the adrenaline and fear of the confrontation, realized she needed a moment alone to compose herself. "I should check if he's actually left," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let him go," Ethan replied, his eyes still fixed on the door. "We have bigger concerns now." Eleanor stepped forward, gently squeezing Jessica's arm. "I'll make us some tea," she said kindly. "This seems like a conversation that needs tea." Jessica nodded, grateful for the support, though the weight of the situation still hung in the air between them. Ethan's eyes followed her as she moved to prepare the tea, his mind racing with the implications of the evening's events. "Jessica," Ethan said softly, his voice breaking the silence. She paused, turning to him, her expression unreadable. "We need to talk." Her gaze was steady but distant. "I think your business partner has said everything that needs saying, Mr. Mitchell." The formality in her words stung, more than he expected. "You haven't told your side. Would it make a difference?" She glanced back, her smile bitter. "Some battles aren't worth fighting twice." As the storm continued to howl outside, Ethan found himself unable to sleep. His mind was consumed with the Nortec situation, but more than that, his thoughts kept circling back to Jessica. The hurt in her eyes when she'd realized he was doubting her. The resignation in her voice. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. He opened the door to find Eleanor standing there, wrapped in a blanket. "Mother, you should be resting." "I've had quite enough rest," Eleanor said, moving past him into the small room. "We need to talk about Jessica. There's nothing to discuss." "Don't lie to me, Ethan." Eleanor settled onto the edge of the cot, her gaze unwavering. "James Harrington has poisoned your mind against her, hasn't he?" Ethan sighed heavily. "It's complicated. There's history between them. Professional conflicts that could impact our business. And that's all that matters to you? Business?" Eleanor's disappointment was palpable. "That girl saved my life today, and you're letting that snake turn you against her without even hearing her story." "I tried to hear her story. She wouldn't tell me." "Would you?" Eleanor asked gently. "In her position? After the way you looked at her just now?" Eleanor shook her head slowly. "I may be old, Ethan, but I know a good soul when I meet one. And I know when my son is making a terrible mistake." Ethan felt her words hit him like a physical blow, but before he could respond, a commotion downstairs drew their attention. "Stay here," he instructed Eleanor, heading for the stairs. In the main dining area, he found Jessica confronting James, their voices low but intense. "You have no right," Jessica was saying, fury evident in her every movement. "No right to come here and threaten me again." "Threaten?" James scoffed. "I'm simply having a friendly conversation about old times." James' smile faltered when he noticed Ethan. "Ah, there you are. Jessica and I were just reminiscing." Ethan's gaze was cold. "It didn't sound like reminiscing." "Mr. Harrington was just leaving," Jessica announced, arms crossed defensively across her chest. "Apparently, the storm has cleared enough for travel." James shrugged. "The plows came through. Roads to the north are passable now." He gathered his coat. Ethan turned to her. "We should leave too. The Nortec situation requires our immediate attention." "Nortec?" Jessica repeated, her tone like ice. "Of course. It all makes sense now." Something in her expression made Ethan hesitate. "What do you know about Nortec?" he asked, his voice quiet but insistent. Before she could answer, James interrupted. "Ethan, this is hardly the time or place. We have a crisis to manage." "It was Nortec, wasn't it?" Jessica's gaze never left Ethan's face. "That was what I found. The fraud at Harrington Capital." James' face hardened. "You're delusional," he snapped. Ethan's mind raced. "Is it? The woman who tried to destroy my company just happens to be here with your mother the night before our biggest deal." James shook his head, disbelief clouding his features. "I don't believe in coincidences." Jessica stood tall, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "I don't either." Ethan studied her for a moment before speaking, his voice steady but filled with determination. "Explain." Jessica inhaled deeply, her voice calm despite the weight of her words. 3 years ago, I discovered irregularities in Nortec's financial reports while working at Harrington Capital. Multiple reports, systematically altered to inflate their value. When I brought my concerns to management. Her gaze flicked to James. I was told to adjust my findings. "She's lying," James interjected, his voice desperate. "Nortec's financials were thoroughly vetted." "By whom?" Jessica challenged. "The same team you instructed to falsify data. The same analysts who mysteriously received promotions after I was discredited." Ethan held up his hand, silencing James. "Continue," he said to Jessica. She drew a steadying breath. "When I refused to participate, I was removed from the Nortec account. A week later, I found evidence that the manipulation went beyond Nortec. It was systematic. Harrington Capital was artificially inflating the value of multiple companies before acquisition deals." James scoffed. "Preposterous. If there had been any truth to these allegations, the SEC would have." "The SEC investigation was a sham," Jessica cut in. "Because by the time I gathered enough evidence to approach them, someone had already altered the original data. My access credentials were used to make changes I never authorized. It made it appear I was the one committing fraud. A heavy silence followed her words. James' face had gone still, and Ethan's analytical mind registered the unnatural composure. Not outrage, not shock. Calculation. You were set up, Ethan said quietly, finally understanding. Yes, Jessica replied, her gaze never leaving his. By the time I realized what had happened, I'd been fired for ethical violations, blacklisted from every financial institution in New York. My former colleagues were warned not to associate with me. My reputation was destroyed. So you ran, Ethan concluded. I didn't run, Jessica corrected, her chin lifting. I was pushed out, threatened with litigation if I pursued my claims. With no job, mounting legal bills, and suddenly toxic to every firm in Manhattan, I had to start over. Convenient story, James interrupted, his voice smooth again but filled with doubt. But ultimately unprovable. The SEC found nothing because you destroyed the evidence, Jessica shot back. But you didn't get all of it. James went very still. What do you mean? Jessica's smile was cold. Insurance policy. When Eleanor had bustled off to the kitchen, Ethan finally turned to face Jessica, his expression unreadable. You've had this evidence for 3 years, he said, his voice measured but heavy with implications. Why didn't you use it? Jessica sank into a booth, suddenly feeling the weight of exhaustion settle over her. I tried, she murmured, her voice quiet. No one would listen. James had thoroughly discredited me, and Harrington Capital had resources I couldn't match. Then there were the threats. What threats? Ethan's voice was low, intent on hearing more. At first, just professional ones. Then they got more personal. She looked down at her hands, her fingers still trembling slightly from the tension of the evening. One night, someone broke into my apartment. Ethan's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. Nothing was taken, but my files were clearly searched. The next day, I received a photo of my parents' graves with a message, some things should stay buried. Ethan's face hardened, his eyes narrowing. James, he muttered under his breath, his anger simmering beneath the surface. I never found proof, Jessica added, her voice soft but steady. But the timing was persuasive. So I left. Started over. Tried to build a quiet life where no one from that world would find me. Until tonight, Ethan said softly. Until tonight, she agreed, her gaze steady as she met his eyes. He slid into the booth across from her, leaning in slightly. I need to see this evidence. Why? Jessica asked, her brow furrowing. So Mitchell Innovations can contain the damage? The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable, and Ethan noticed the sharpness in her tone. He softened slightly, correcting himself. So I can do the right thing. Jessica studied his face, searching for any sign of deceit. And what is the right thing in your estimation? I don't know yet, Ethan said, his honesty disarming her. But burying the truth isn't it? Just then, Eleanor returned with 3 mugs of tea, sliding one to each of them before sitting down beside Ethan, her presence bringing an unexpected sense of calm. So, she said briskly, her tone businesslike, my son's business partner is a criminal, and the lovely young woman who saved me from freezing to death is his witness. Whistleblower, even. What are we going to do about it? The way Eleanor framed the situation, so practical and matter-of-fact, startled a laugh out of Jessica. The sound was unexpected, and it caught her off guard. She hadn't laughed like that in a long time. Mother, Ethan groaned, though the corner of his mouth twitched with amusement. Eleanor simply sipped her tea, completely unfazed. What? Am I wrong? Jessica couldn't help herself, she smiled despite the heaviness of the moment. No one who's met you would ever make that mistake. Then stop dancing around each other and make a plan, Eleanor said firmly, setting her mug down with finality. Jessica has evidence. Ethan has influence. Between you, you can fix this mess. It's not that simple, Ethan began, the familiar skepticism returning to his voice. It never is, Eleanor agreed, her voice surprisingly soft but full of wisdom. But doing the right thing rarely is. Jessica watched as Ethan's expression softened as he looked at his mother. For all their past estrangement, the bond between them was clear, there was a shared moral clarity between them that seemed to cut through all the complications. The evidence is in a safe deposit box, Jessica said after a moment, her voice steady. In Boston. Ethan nodded. Once the storm clears, we'll go there together. And then, she pressed. And then we bring the truth to light. Properly this time. With resources James can't intimidate or outmaneuver. Ethan's tone was firm, his resolve hardening. Your company will survive, he continued. Mitchell Innovations is more than its partnerships. The foundations are solid, even if some of the structures built on them aren't. Eleanor beamed at her son, pride radiating from her in every line of her face. That's my boy. For the first time in years, Jessica allowed herself to feel hope, fragile, but real. It won't be easy, Jessica said, the uncertainty creeping into her voice. James has powerful friends, deep pockets. So do I, Ethan reminded her, a spark of the ruthless businessman returning to his eyes. But now it's directed toward a worthy target. And unlike James, he added, his tone steady, I don't have to hide from the truth. Eleanor yawned, breaking the intensity of the moment. Well, this has been quite an evening, she said, stretching her arms out. I think I'll try to get some more sleep before dawn. She patted Jessica's hand affectionately. Don't worry, dear. My son can be stubborn and sometimes arrogant. But when it matters, he makes the right choices. After Eleanor had gone, Jessica and Ethan sat in companionable silence. The storm outside began to ease, much like the turbulence between them. Ethan was the first to break the silence. I'm sorry I doubted you, he said, his voice quieter than usual. Jessica nodded slowly. You had reason to, she acknowledged. Loyalty to friends is admirable, even when misplaced. Not at the expense of truth, he replied firmly. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. Or justice, he added, his eyes meeting hers with sincerity. The warmth of his touch, the sincerity in his eyes, made something shift inside Jessica. A wall beginning to crumble, a door long closed, starting to open. Why are you helping me? She asked softly, her voice hesitant. You could have left with James, protected your company. Your reputation, perhaps. I'm tired of being the ruthless CEO everyone expects, Ethan confessed, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her wrist. Or perhaps I found something more important than quarterly projections and market share in a small-town diner during a blizzard. She smiled skeptically. Stranger things have happened. His smile, warm and genuine, transformed his face completely. My mother would say it was fate. And what would Ethan Mitchell say? She asked, raising an eyebrow. He considered the question seriously before answering, his tone thoughtful. That sometimes we need to get lost to find what we're really looking for. Outside, the first pale light of dawn began to illuminate the snow-covered landscape. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed. Pristine, unblemished, full of new possibilities, much like the feeling slowly taking root between them. 6 months later, Jessica stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ethan's penthouse, watching snow drift lazily over Burlington. The view of Lake Champlain at sunset was breathtaking, painted in shades of gold and crimson. But her attention was on the headline blazing across her tablet, Harrington Capital executives indicted for securities fraud. Quite the anniversary gift, Ethan said, joining her at the window. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting atop her head. 6 months isn't an anniversary, Jessica corrected, leaning back against him. It's a milestone, he said with a soft smile. 6 months since a blizzard and a lost mother changed everything. I'd call that worth celebrating, he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind. The evidence in Jessica's Boston safe deposit box had proven devastating not just for James Harrington, but for an entire network of financial manipulation that had infected multiple firms. The SEC investigation this time had been thorough and uncompromising. Thanks in no small part to Ethan's influence and resources, Mitchell Innovations had weathered the storm. The company's stock had taken an initial hit when Ethan publicly disclosed the fraudulent practices within their partner companies, but his transparency and commitment to reform had ultimately strengthened their position. Investors respected integrity, it turned out, especially when backed by decisive action. "I still can't believe it's finally over," Jessica said, setting down the tablet. 3 years of looking over my shoulder, and now justice," Ethan finished, his tone solemn. "Though I'm not sure 13 years in federal prison is enough for what James did to you." "It's not about the punishment," Jessica said softly. "It's about the truth finally being acknowledged." She turned in his arms to face him. "And about reclaiming my life." Ethan traced the curve of her cheek with his thumb. "Speaking of which, have you given any more thought to my offer?" After the evidence had been secured and the legal proceedings begun, Ethan had offered Jessica a position heading up a new ethics and compliance division at Mitchell Innovations. The role would leverage her financial expertise while establishing industry-leading standards for transparent business practices. "I'm still considering it," she replied, though her smile suggested otherwise. "Working for my boyfriend seems complicated." "Then make it uncomplicated," Ethan suggested, his tone casual despite the sudden intensity in his eyes. "How exactly would I do that?" "Marry me instead." Jessica froze, certain she had misheard. "What did you just say?" Jessica's voice trembled as she stared at the small velvet box in Ethan's hand. His gaze met hers, unwavering. "I said," he repeated, with a faint smile, "marry me instead." He opened the box to reveal a stunning emerald ring set in platinum, its deep green glow catching the light in a way that felt almost otherworldly. Jessica's heart skipped a beat as she gazed at the ring. "Then I'd be working for my wife, not the other way around," he added, his tone soft but playful. "How do you figure that?" she asked, her voice unsteady, still trying to process the moment. "Because you'd own me, heart and soul," Ethan said, his usual confidence slipping just slightly as vulnerability flickered behind his eyes. "You already do." Jessica looked up from the ring and met his eyes, seeing the raw honesty there, something she once thought impossible from the ruthless CEO she had first met. "This is sudden," she said, her voice quiet, the weight of the moment settling in. "Is it?" Ethan replied, a small smile curling on his lips. 6 months of 14-hour days, rebuilding my company's ethical framework together, learning to trust again, both of us falling asleep going over SEC testimony and waking up in each other's arms. He paused, his smile turning wry. "Mother says we've been married in all but name since the night of the blizzard." "Your mother," Jessica laughed, a playful light in her eyes, "is a romantic meddler." "My mother," Ethan corrected, "is never wrong. Especially about what's good for me." Jessica took the ring box from his hand, turning the emerald over in her fingers as she studied it. "Why not a diamond?" she asked, intrigued. "Because you're not conventional," Ethan replied, his voice softening. "You're rare, valuable, and the exact color of your eyes when you're about to challenge me on something ridiculous." His smile softened. "Also, diamonds remind you of Wall Street, and I wanted something that only reminded you of us." Jessica raised an eyebrow, impressed despite herself. "You've thought this through." "I'm thorough," he agreed, then added, with uncharacteristic uncertainty, "Jessica, you haven't answered me." She looked up at him, at this man who had gone from cold, ruthless CEO to someone who had risked his company and reputation for what was right. Someone who now looked at her not as a conquest or an asset, but as an equal. Someone to build a life with. "Before I answer," she said carefully, "I need to know something. If I say yes, am I accepting a job as well as a proposal?" Because I'm not sure the job offer is separate. Ethan cut her off before she could finish. It's not separate, he said firmly. Accept it. Decline it. Counteroffer. That's business. This, he gestured to the ring, is personal. The only merger I care about right now, he added quietly. Jessica's heart skipped as she looked at the emerald ring, then back at him. Her lips curved into a smile as she slid the ring onto her finger. In that case, I accept the proposal. That is, the job offer still requires negotiation. Joy lit up Ethan's face, and in one swift motion, he lifted her off her feet, twirling her around in a gleeful embrace. I wouldn't expect anything less, he laughed, setting her down gently. Name your terms, future Mrs. Mitchell. Oh, no, she laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. I'm keeping Porter professionally. You'll have to earn having your name on my office door. Challenge accepted, he murmured against her lips, the moment rich with possibility. Later that evening, they celebrated with Eleanor at Maple Street Diner, which was now under new ownership, Jessica's. She had purchased it with part of the substantial settlement she received when Harrington Capital's fraudulent practices were exposed. It was a fresh start, her second chance. Eleanor raised her glass in a toast, the glimmer of pride in her eyes as she looked between the two of them. To second chances, she said, her voice warm. The diner had been closed for the private celebration, and its once-worn booths and polished counters now gleamed with new life, much like its owner. And to blizzards, Ethan added with a grin. May they always lead us exactly where we need to be. Even if it's not where we plan to go. Jessica finished, her heart full as she looked between her future husband and the woman who would soon be her mother-in-law. Eleanor beamed at them. I knew it from the moment I saw you two together. The way you challenged each other. Respected each other. No pretense, no games, Ethan warned good-naturedly. What? I'm allowed to be smug. Eleanor laughed, her eyes twinkling. He needed someone who saw the man behind the CEO, Eleanor said, turning to Jessica. And you, my dear, needed someone who would stand beside you in the fight, not run from it. As if on cue, the bell above the diner door jingled. They turned to see Mr. Winters, their first customer from the night of the blizzard, entering with a small wrapped package. Hope I'm not interrupting, he said, approaching their booth. Just heard the news about the engagement and wanted to drop this off, he said with a warm smile. You're always welcome, Arthur, Jessica said, accepting the gift with a grateful smile. Inside was a beautiful hand-carved wooden snowflake. Made it myself, Mr. Winters explained with a shy smile. To remember how it all started. It's perfect, Jessica said, her voice genuinely touched. Thank you. After he left, Ethan examined the delicate carving with a thoughtful expression. We should have a winter wedding, he suggested, his tone light but his eyes serious. A full circle in the diner? Jessica teased. Why not? Eleanor chimed in, her smile warm. It would be uniquely yours. I was joking, Jessica protested. I'm not, Ethan said thoughtfully. Not entirely. Not about the winter part, at least. There's something poetic about finding our future in the season that brought us together. Jessica considered the idea, warming to it despite herself. December, she said, her voice softening. But not in the diner. The lakeside, then? Ethan suggested. With the mountains in the background, Eleanor observed with a raised brow. Cold. We'll keep each other warm, Ethan said, his eyes never leaving Jessica's. 6 months later, as December snow dusted the shores of Lake Champlain, Jessica Porter became Jessica Porter Mitchell in an intimate ceremony witnessed by their closest friends. Eleanor, radiant in silver blue, dabbed at her tears as they exchanged vows beneath an arch of winter roses and pine boughs. When I first met you, Ethan said, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed gathering, you challenged everything I thought I knew about success, about worth, about what matters. You stood your ground when it would have been easier to run. You chose truth when lies would have been safer. He squeezed her hands. I promise to be worthy of that courage every day of our lives together. When I first met you, Jessica replied, her smile teasing despite the tears in her eyes, I thought you were the most arrogant man I'd ever encountered. Laughter rippled through the audience. I wasn't wrong, she continued, her voice light but sincere. But I discovered that your arrogance was matched by your integrity once you found it again. Your determination by your compassion, your ambition by your capacity for love. Her voice softened. I promise to remind you of those qualities whenever the world tries to make you forget them again. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, snow began to fall. Gentle, pristine flakes that glittered like diamonds in the winter sunlight. A perfect circle, Eleanor would later say, a story written in snow and second chances. At the reception, Jessica found herself momentarily alone, watching Ethan across the room. As he laughed with friends, she thought of the journey that had brought them here, from a desperate whistleblower and a ruthless CEO to partners in every sense. Penny, for your thoughts. Eleanor appeared at her side, resplendent in her mother-of-the-groom finery. Just reflecting on how different his life might have been if you hadn't gotten lost in that blizzard, Jessica replied, linking her arm through the older woman's. Eleanor's eyes twinkled. Who says I was lost? Jessica stared at her, a little stunned. You mean sometimes, Eleanor said with a mysterious smile, a mother knows exactly what her son needs, even when he doesn't. You planned it? Jessica asked incredulously. Getting stranded at my diner? Planned is a strong word. Let's say I created an opportunity. The blizzard was just fortunate timing. She patted Jessica's hand. The taxi driver was very well compensated, I assure you. Before Jessica could respond, Ethan joined them, sliding his arm around his new wife's waist. What are you two conspiring about? Your mother was just explaining how happy I am that you found each other, Eleanor interrupted smoothly. A perfect match, as if fate itself arranged it. Or a meddling mother, Jessica murmured, though her eyes danced with amusement. What was that, dear? Eleanor asked innocently. Nothing, Jessica laughed, leaning into Ethan's embrace. Just agreeing about fate. As they moved to the dance floor for their first waltz as husband and wife, Ethan pulled her close. You look like you're keeping a secret, he observed. Jessica smiled up at him, snowflakes catching in her lashes. I'll tell you someday, when we're old and gray and still arguing about ethics violations in board meetings. Promise? He asked, spinning her beneath the twinkling lights. Promise, she agreed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering Burlington in a fresh blanket of possibility, a reminder that sometimes the most perfect endings begin with unexpected storms and the courage to shelter someone in need.